Alright everyone, today's video is going to be a little bit different. I'm here right now with two members of the Triple S League who are responsible for a lot of different news, releases, and inside material regarding Cyberpunk 2077, among other games. And I thought that we would do a nice Q&A here since they have a lot of information about this great upcoming title, and I would get their feedback. And it's something that I haven't really tackled on the channel before, doing this kind of structured Q&A, but I thought it would be good for everyone involved, and I really think that this game is going to be worthwhile, and I wanted to bring it to our audience here at Upper Echelon. So without further ado, we're going to get started with the Q&A, and you can check out the links down below, but I'll speak more about that at the end of the video. Alright, so everybody seems to inevitably draw comparisons. For instance, The Surge is just like Dark Souls, or Kingdom Come Deliverance is a lot like realistic Skyrim, you know, without the dragons, etc., etc. And when looking at Cyberpunk 2077, given the significant amount of research and knowledge that you guys have going into this, what three individual games would you compare elements of Cyberpunk to, and why?
Well, I'll tackle this one because I'm fairly new to the cyberpunk concept in terms of it being its own game. I've been very familiar with cyberpunk as a genre for a long time, but I didn't realize there was an actual pen and paper game called Cyberpunk, or the Cyberpunk series of games like Cyberpunk 2020 and the sequels to that. So from everything I've learned about the game over the past few months, I would pick these three games. I would say it's very similar to Deus Ex in the terms of that game series is set in a very cyberpunk universe. High tech, low life, lots of augmentations of human people, huge reliance on technology, mega corporations that try to rule and control things and have their way with the world, that kind of thing. So if you enjoy Deus Ex or any other cyberpunk style of games, because it is a genre as well as being its own game, you'll probably enjoy Cyberpunk 2077 in terms of the setting. The second game I would compare it to is The Witcher 3, and I say that because it's obviously a CD Projekt Red game as well. One of their most successful game, and the last game to come out before they released Cyberpunk 2077. So when we look at that, it's going to be similar to The Witcher 3 in terms of the scale, the scope, a very large open world that you can explore. There's going to be tons and tons of quests. There's going to be a huge focus on the narrative, on character interactions, on dialogue, and on story, as well as some really fun action and exploration and that kind of thing. So even though the setting is going to be very different, because The Witcher obviously a fantasy setting, not a sci-fi, but in terms of a lot of the gameplay elements, there's going to be a lot of similarities there. And then the third one I would pick would be the Fallout games, because it does have a post-apocalyptic edge to it, and it's going to be an RPG. And there's going to be factions, there's going to be skill trees, there's going to be things that you can do to your character to increase your skills. There is a bit of a post-apocalyptic edge to the cyberpunk world. There's actually an area of the city that got nuked in an event in the lore. So there's going to be probably some radioactive fallout. So those are the three: Deus Ex, The Witcher, and Fallout.
I would have to agree with Ash. Basically, it's like the game concept is going to have this very strong feel and look like a Deus Ex in the sense that you're going to have like this high, like mega corporation style look and, this really super rich level. And then you're going to go from there to like trash alley really, really quickly. And the difference between those two levels of the people living on those two different levels, the swing from one to the other is actually going to be really, really quick. There is going to be this, and for these types of games, there is always this kind of like middle class area, but the middle class is a boring area to be in. It's not going to be something that's going to be inhabited by most of the game. Most of the NPCs that you encounter, most of the areas that you go visit, you want to visit the places that have stuff going on, and this like very marginal chunk of the middle class isn't really going to be too much of a concern. Where the action's going to be is where there's gunfights in the streets and assassinations at the top echelons of the high rises kind of thing. So if you're familiar with Altered Carbon and how in that TV show it's the same kind of thing. There is this middle class that you have because you see it everywhere. You see it in the other towers and in the other buildings. There's this big section of the middle, but the show goes from the bottom to the top, and you don't really spend any time in the middle. You go from, ground level to being at the tallest heights of the tallest towers, and there's very little in between time. And I feel that's what we're going to see in a lot of the gameplay, because like I said, the middle ground is boring, where the action is up at the top with these high level assassinations and trying to take over businesses and companies and corporations, and politicians and company owners dealing with the lives of billions as they like essentially flip a coin. And then the street level, where that flip of the coin really impacts everybody and everything, and that's also where the resistance to the system is the strongest, and so that's where you're going to see the most action. That's where you're going to see all the various tropes and identification that people will identify them with, as far as it comes to what kind of class are they in, what kind of environment that they're in, and what they're doing in response to the system that they're finding themselves living in. Ash, what do you think?
Altered Carbon is a very cyberpunk themed show, by the way. If anyone's interested in sort of an introduction to the cyberpunk type world, that's a great place to start. It's a very, very cyberpunk show. Cyberpunk is really high technology, low life. It's kind of it's a technological dystopia where you have, as opposed to Star Trek, which is a technological utopia. Technology sort of unites humankind, and everything is really great. There's peace. There isn't so much wars and greed and that kind of thing. Cyberpunk is the opposite. There's a huge focus on sort of the dregs of society, the slums, the negative aspects of life, while you have the really high class people who are making billions off of technology, and then you have the people living on the street because they're addicted to their virtual reality implants or things like that, right? And you see a lot of that in Altered Carbon. You see a lot of it in Deus Ex. You'll see a lot of it in Cyberpunk 2077 as well.
What kind of systems can we potentially expect? I mean, more specifically, you have crafting, you have different elemental damage types, you can have resources, scavenging, things like that, looting through barrels and, finding and equipping more gear. In a lot of games now, there's a rarity curve as well when you're acquiring new equipment, so there'll be common, uncommon, rare, epic, legendary items. Does it have these types of systems, or will it feature a more static and realistic uniform gearing system where you kind of have a certain loadout, you have a certain set of skills, and then you're using those same things throughout the course of the game to influence more in an Assassin's Creed style of way? Or is it going to be something that is a little bit more similar to the looter shooters that we're seeing become really popular right now?
Well, so basically we don't have any concrete information on this in the sense of they've shown us these systems. We're expecting to see this probably come out at E3 this year, so we're going to see a large dump of information on these particular types of things. But what we know for sure is we know that Mike Pondsmith and the creators and in the leadership positions, when they talk about this game, they've talked about it being an RPG first and foremost, and respecting and seeking to really bring in the RPG elements. So we might see a very good chance of, we're probably going to see some type of crafting system. We're definitely going to see various types of different forms of combat. Mike Pondsmith confirmed last year that we would have some of the more unique classes from the pen and paper in the game, which includes journalist and rock star, essentially.
So very unique classes. It'll be a new adventure for people who are used to sort of a more D&D class system. There'll be a lot of new classes to explore in this one.
It's not just going to a Trinity system. It's going to a system that's it's a far more complex system than that, because you're going to have companions as well. So certain companions are going to be able to offset your skills when you're doing single player. And we know this because they haven't come out and said anything specifically on it, but what they have come out and done a lot of hiring on in the last 2 years has been people to help them code and create companions, which was something that they didn't really have a lot of in the Witcher series, but we're expecting to see a substantial boost in this in the Cyberpunk series. And on top of just regular old companions that are interesting and very important to the narrative, we're also potentially going to see a lot of like robot combat pets, basically like some summonable characters that they're not NPCs in the traditional sense. They're combat aids, like a hunter's pet or something like that. So we're going to see potentially one or more or even multiple different types of these kinds of characters.
We do know that there is going to be in-game modding, like equipment modding. So not talking about like modding the game, but modding your weapons, modding your armor in-game. Also modding your character, because there's going to be cyberware, there's going to be implants you can get that enhance your abilities, that kind of thing.
We're going to see a huge depth to this when it comes to modding your character. You're going to be able to mod in certain abilities or certain tactical combat abilities that other characters might not have. Like we saw in the trailer, we saw the one girl who had all of her skin swapped out for, basically a bulletproof exoskeleton for what little remained of her original like genetic material. So you're going to be able to like almost become a full-on like robot in some cases, and what you end up dealing with is you do end up dealing with cyber psychosis, where if you do too much conversion, then you'll just go insane. But then there'll be different levels of like resistances to that. So there's a good chance that some classes or some characters are going to be more able to take more conversion, and then other characters and classes will take a little bit less. Especially like we might see a journalist have a very low level for that, whereas some of the more beefier combat classes are definitely going to have a much higher level of tolerance when it comes to swapping out body parts and stuff like that.
What kind of information do you have on world and setting? I know we've definitely already covered some of this. We've talked about comparisons to Altered Carbon. We've talked about the juxtaposition of the societal tiers, where you have the very poor versus the very rich. And obviously it has a futuristic science fiction bent to it. But within that, there's also some seriously deep potential. Kind of think Anthem and the setting that game is in, with the sheer amount of things that the developers can do. They're not really penned into one specific thing. If you look at Kingdom Come Deliverance, with the historical accuracy and the setting in Bohemia, they have a narrow set of options. But with something like Cyberpunk, that blooms into this wonderful, enormous tree of potential. So factions, government structure, social structure, again, we've already touched on it, but maybe more in depth what you found in your studies about maybe kind of a religious faction or element that's going to be present, different government agencies that are going to be competing for different interests. What kind of systems do you anticipate being in place in the game?
This is where we're going to get into some really fun stuff. We're going to get into some really, really awesome stuff. We have one of the biggest things that you're going to encounter is going to be booster gangs. And booster gangs are going to be everywhere. And they're probably going to end up being one of the main groups of bad guys. They're like bandits in Skyrim. They're literally everywhere. And they literally only really work for themselves. And there's going to be a ton of different kinds. So think about... essentially, this was written back in the 80s was the time and place that this originally was taken from. So you're going to have a whole wide variety of like 80s style gangs. So one of the types of gangs that there are is that like these gothic like girls, and it's female only groups, and they're dressed in this very gothic look, and they do assassinations. And then we're potentially going to see like some clown posse style gangs, and then you're on top of that you're going to have some like biker gang types. And so literally any type of gang that you can imagine or think of that's been used in comics or movies or anything is the type of gangs that you're potentially going to see within the streets. And then on top of that, you also have like real gangs, like gangs that you should be legitimately scared of in a global level, like the Yakuza, and like these high-end like professional mafia and hitmen that will, and again that has to do with the varying scope of this game. So at the upper ends, at the higher ends, that's where you're going to have these like professional level assassins and gangs that are, they're dressed to the nines, and they, carry heavy weapons with them everywhere they go, and swords and killing people from the shadows, that kind of thing. And then there's going to be a certain influence of governments and mega corporations that are going to employ like some robotic. We saw this in one of the teaser images they put out. This is giant, like 3-story tall robot that's walking around, and so you're going to see a lot of these kind of armies that are comprised out of like just androids and robots running around too. And so the combat that the world's going to give you in form of in the form of factions, and being able to placate to some of those factions or join them is going to be pretty huge. We're expecting to have the ability to join any faction from the low-level street gangs, beerster gangs, all the way up to the mega corporation, assassin teams and the Arasaka, hit squads and that kind of stuff that we're going to see inside the scope of the factions in the game itself. Governments aren't so much a big thing in Cyberpunk 2077. They're basically like puppets.
Really, it's the mega corporations running the show, and those are going to be the major factions in the game. If you think of it like major factions and then smaller factions, the real major governing factions are going to be your mega corporations. They're actually running the show. The government is the governments basically are their puppets, because business is done very differently in this world. If you're a company and you want to initiate a hostile takeover of another company, basically you go in with your army and kill everybody. That's how things work in this world. It's very, very dark, kind of, as I said, futuristic dystopia. So there are actual faction wars, like mega corporations going to war with each other, and they employ these massive, well-equipped armies. This is what led to a big chunk of Night City being nuked in the lore of the pen and paper games. We're going to see a lot of that. So there's probably going to be corporate espionage aspects to it. We're at some quest lines for the different corporations. Probably make you enemies of other corporations. So there's going to be so much to do in this game that it's kind of mind-blowing. It's not surprising that it's taken this long to come out, because I think we're in for quite a ride with this one.
So in the original teaser, you had essentially two characters showcased, and one of the police character that was showcased was essentially Judge Dredd. I mean, their getup and like gear loadout is even similar. Yeah, and that's the police squad. That's going to be another faction within the game, where it's the regular police, and then there's the psychos, and they're dealt with by the squad that's called the Psycho Squad, that's going to come in, and they're to the nines, geared out, and mostly through like alterations to the body, and they often will pick up people who have gone over and have become like fully insane, and they'll often recruit them if they're able to like retrieve their mental state. They'll often recruit them because they're already geared out to the nines as far as like all this gear and body alterations and bulletproof armor and extendable blades from the hands and stuff like this, and they're gonna take that person, they're gonna put them into the service of the Psycho Squad, because only these psychos essentially can take on other psychos. So that's really going to feed into this style of like the Judge Dredd kind of like super cop. And then you're going to have these detectives that are going to be very much like the Blade Runner. And then you're also going to have the police force, hunting down crazy people, because in this world of high tech, literally anybody can do certain things, and small individuals can end up creating mass chaos, and so you're going to have to counter that with some team of equivalent power.
So we know the world is massive based on previous material and hints released by the development team. It's huge. It's speculated to be, if I'm informed correctly, about 3 times the size of Witcher 3, and we already talked about this a little bit previously in one of the earlier questions. So if I'm right, that's Yeah, that's a huge, huge world. What kind of things would you expect them to implement in order to maintain interest throughout that entire enormous world and not have it become kind of a barren, boring, just artistically rendered landscape? Because if we look at other games like The Division, you can see that their open world, though it is artistically made, there is a lot of material there. There's a lot of cars crashed, a lot of trash on the streets. It's very cluttered. It does kind of fall apart, and there's not very much to do after you reach kind of the sort of end game loop. Now with
It's very
Cyberpunk,
homogenous.
you've already talked a little bit about the societal tiers, and you have the lower kind of cluttered, maybe war in the streets area, and then you have the high skyscrapers with the mega corporations and the CEOs up on their in their ivory tower. But how are they going to maintain interest throughout a world of that scope?
Well, I think they're going to have an easier time with it than they have with, say, a game like The Witcher, even because The Witcher, it's mostly landscape. It's fairly homogeneous. I mean, there's some variation to it, and there's a lot of variation in the different cultures of the different areas that you can visit. With Night City, what you're going to have, even though it's mostly going to be an urban environment, there's going to be lots of different landscapes within that. You're going to have your heavily corporate areas with the huge skyscrapers. You're going to have the slums. You're going to have, again, an area that's probably destroyed because of some of the corporate wars that took place previously. It's also possible that there will be areas underground, outside the city, maybe a virtual world that you can enter. There's a thing called the brain dance, which is kind of like virtual reality, but it literally lets you experience somebody else's memories. So if you're experiencing memories of another character, those could take place in completely different areas. There's also the online virtual world. It's like the internet, but it's like a virtual environment you can enter. And we know from material that we found inside the CD Projekt Red offices by doing a virtual tour on Google Maps, which you can go do. Anyone can go do it. We found some material inside that showed us that there's going to be not one, but 2 sandbox environments. And so there's some speculation about what's that second environment going to be. And it could be something online. It could some sort of virtual environment within the game. It could be something connected to the multiplayer, because we know there's going to be a multiplayer component to the game. Anyway, to tie that back to your original question, there's going to be a lot of variety, a lot of different areas to explore in this game. I don't think we're going to get bored with it anytime soon.
All right, so as far as the size and scope of the world, when you're making a direct comparison of Witcher 3 to Cyberpunk 2077, there's a couple of key factors that factor into size and scope. And unfortunately, you do get a lot of dead zones or a lot of dead space. This is until technology can catch up and actually procedurally generate an entire city where there's, every building has every room accessible. You can't have that as far as modern technology can do today, and have a city that's a full-size city. You don't have the technology to do it without creating so much space within the game that it's when you're flying through an area, you're loading all of that. That's gonna not very few systems could even handle anything close to that. So what they have to do is they do have to add some of these dead spaces. But then space in and of itself is increased on The Witcher. So in The Witcher, you have trails, or you have roads that go from one town to another town. And right away there, we have a major difference, because most of those trails are going to be big enough for 1, maybe 2 animals to move side by side, like 2 horses. In Cyberpunk 2077, you're going to have 8 lanes of traffic, because you have to. Because if you have a single road tying, one section of the city to another section of the city, that's just, not only is it improbable, it's that's not going to create a world that can make sense. So it's going to be much bigger in the sense of how the roads are sized. And then you're also going to have that movement speed. When you're on a horse traveling through a town, that's a totally different speed than when you're in a flying vehicle and you're flying through a city at 100 miles an hour. It's going to really change the way that you perceive space and how you perceive what to do within that space. You're going to fly past quest areas, quest hubs, and you're going to go to a different hub, and there's going to be different stuff to do there. So that is going to create some dead space, but that dead space is not necessarily used as their of them quantifying the map size. That stuff that just, it's like the mountains in The Witcher. They're there. You can't really like spend a lot of time in them because they're just there for looks in the show. They're not there so that you can scale them like you can in Skyrim. We're going to have an ocean, so there's going to be a lot of dead space in the ocean. And that's fine as long as they do it right. And they are going to do it right because The Witcher was quite an enjoyable environment to be in. And you also had that dead space within The Witcher as well. But when it comes to the cities, you're going to have this verticality to the city as well. So you're going to have the stuff on the ground floor, and then you're going to go into a building and you're going to go up throughout the levels of the buildings to the different levels of society and stuff to do, and you're going to have stuff to do throughout, especially in these like clumped areas. You are going to have complete access to all of the floors in some of these buildings because that's how the quest is going to be designed. And then it's also like when you're trying to like go up and like scale up in an attack or something like that, or if you're trying to like steal some information or something, there's a lot of that space that can be used as combat space for combat environments, and that's something that can add flavor to the game without necessarily creating too much clutter for it. But that verticality in the game is also going to be used. But on top of that, what they've said and what we got from Mike Pondsmith when he was asked about this leak, this was actually our leak about the map being 4 times bigger, is when he was asked about it to confirm it, he laughed and he said, "You guys have no idea. Like 4 times? Yeah, that's pretty close, but you have no idea. You have no idea how big this game is going to be."
We're pretty sure he doesn't mean that we were overestimating.
No, we have it on fairly good authority that he said that was a pretty good estimate, and in fact it's going to be quite possibly it's going to be a lot bigger.
And it depends what's included in the estimate. Are they talking about all of the interiors of buildings, or are they talking about just the outside area? Are they talking about both of those sandbox environments, or just the one? Like, it's hard to. We don't know.
Yeah, we know that the virtual world within the game has been rendered basically a war zone due to viruses and all this other technology that's kind of gone haywire since the big attack. So the internet is not the internet of today. It's segmented. It's broken. It's you have internet and Wi-Fi within a building, but you can't connect that to a building on the opposite side of the city without potentially getting like all these viruses in it. So the internet is very segmented, and that works wonders for a game environment because you're not going to be able to like hop in on one side, and then you're on the other side of the city digitally, and then suddenly you're stuck over there and your body is on the other side, and it creates a disconnect within storyline or storytelling. There's going to be this, you log in and the world is going to shift and change, and then you're going to be in this world and you're going to be fighting viruses off while you're trying to access information in older parts of the city, and then you have to worry about the antivirus defense systems of bigger places and towers and that have successfully quarantined themselves. So that kind of environment is going to make this place huge.
All right, so if you were asked to speculate on the future timeline of the game, which again is speculation and highly subjective, how would it look? In the past, you've been responsible for increasingly credible speculations, which have been regarded and cited around the world by a lot of different organizations. What would you see for the rest of 2018? And everybody out there watching, keep in mind that this is highly opinionated, and while there are reasons behind every single speculation, they are still subject to change and should not be taken as literal fact at this juncture. But given your guys' track record, I'm comfortable asking for this kind of prediction, and I would love to hear your feedback.
Well, just in terms of our philosophy with regard to leaks and stuff in general, whenever we get a bit of information, and we have gotten some information in advance through various channels, many of which have to remain secret to protect people's jobs, etc., but we always make an effort to verify that information in another way before we put anything out. And we've been accused before of making stuff up. Absolutely not true. Not to say that we're always going to be right, necessarily, But my partner here is he's an incredibly talented data analyst. He knows where to look for the right information, and it blows my mind constantly the stuff he's able to dig up. But we also try to be responsible with that and not send you out on with wrong information. Anytime we are purely speculating, we say, this is speculation. But that being said, we do have some information on this, and I'll turn it over to Saib. Again, like you said, not 100% guaranteed, and things can change. Like, something might happen to delay development of the game. I mean, hopefully not, but you never know, right?
It's always a very fluid situation with some of this stuff. Now, things that we called like really, really accurately is we did call the fact that we would have a leak early in 2018, which we did, and then we'd have some unofficial leaks in 2018, which we already have had, and then we even called what those leaks would be, and we said that there's most likely going to be a presence at E3 2018, which just got announced, and that they would also be at Gamescom, which also just got announced. And these are, I mean, they're really obvious. If you're an analyst like me, you're tracking information, you're tracking patterns, and they're looking at the best way to make their pitch to the public. This is a new IP. This is an IP that people are unfamiliar with. They're familiar with the studio, but they're not familiar with this story at all. And they're going to be there's going to be a learning curve for the world, for the story, for the content. And because it's not based on a really well-known like book series or TV series, they have a little bit more to go. So really quickly, what we do is we check to see what the industry standards are. We look at them, and then we ask our contacts within the industry and sometimes within the companies, like anything that they can give, and then we verify that before we go out. So like I said, we had a leak early in 2018. They did not a leak, essentially. They had the announcement on their Twitter, which just said beep. But that was to let the world know that they're still there and that they're planning on, speaking up this year. If they weren't planning on speaking up this year, that beep would have waited till next year. So we've got a couple things to look at. So this is March. We're looking at them doing a big trailer at E3. Between now and then, we're going to have the kickoff to their official campaign. I believe this is highly likely, just logically. They're going to want to, like what Fallout 4 did. They did put out a teaser, and then they had some information leak. They had some screenshots come out. They had drip of information leading up to E3. Then E3 came out. They had this blowout showcase, and then they said, oh yeah, and it's also coming out this year. We know that a lot of game studios looked at that, saw the success, and went, guys, we got to do this. This is a no-brainer. So we're going to see most likely a very similar release, and we have it on really good authority that we definitely have some solid information saying that this is a for sure thing. So we're going to see a leak, or we're going to see an announcement, or we're going to see something come out from the studio itself, probably between the end of March and the end of April. I would say somewhere between that 30-day period, or before the end of April and now, we're going to see something quite substantial, and then we're going to have drip of information from that point on right up until the big showcase at E3. And then once the showcase at E3 drops, then we're going to have this constant stuff. We might get a release date, and that release date will probably, if they're going to give us an actual release date and stick with it, I'm thinking they will release it for either holiday this year, probably not super likely, but still in the realm of possibilities, or it would be early next year.
All right, so thank you very much for the feedback, both of you. That's some fantastic information, and if anything, it's gotten me more excited, progressively more so, over the entire interview and the entire process of making this and asking these questions and hearing the answers, because there's some stuff in there that I didn't know and that we really didn't have to touch on, but we did, and it's been fantastic and really interest-piquing, for being honest. So do you guys have any final thoughts, any last-minute things that you want to say before we wrap up?
Yes, I want to say that I'm really glad that it's getting you hyped up and excited, and I hope it gets your audience hyped up and excited, because we really want to get people excited for this game because we think it's going to be an important game for the gaming industry. You know, we're in an era now where these certain corporations are trying to shovel, things like microtransactions and things at us, and expect us to thank them for it. And it's terrible. Like, a lot of game development companies are no longer gamer focused. They're no longer as focused on their core audience, the people that spend the money and play their games, the people they're supposed to be creating a quality product for. But we see in CD Projekt Red, we see a company that cares about their fans and that really wants to deliver a quality product for a decent price that we're going to be happy with. And they've come out and said there's not going to be microtransactions, or if there are, it's purely cosmetic stuff. They're not.
Yeah, what they said was, and this is really important, is that they leave the greed to others. That they're going to give DLC in the way that they gave DLC for the previous games, and that's the way they want to focus it. So we want to encourage that.
So we really want to support the companies that have these practices that are good for the gaming community. So we want to support companies like CD Projekt Red that are doing it right and that are contributing to a healthy gaming community. And so there's lots of reasons to be excited for Cyberpunk 2077. And if anyone is interested in the lore of the game, learning more about the lore, the factions, and the various aspects of the game, we can definitely recommend the Mad Queen's channel. She has tons of videos on that. On our channel, you'll find a lot of discussions about the game itself as well. That's a couple places you can go if you just want to learn more about it. What is Cyberpunk? Because it's a fantastic genre too. It's my favorite game genre, and it's been hard to find really good Cyberpunk games. But now we've got the penultimate Cyberpunk game coming out, so I'm very excited for that.
All right, that's pretty much going to wrap it up. That's all the time we have. A huge thank you to both of you for joining me in this video.
Alrighty.
Thank you so much for having us. This has been great.
To wind down here at the end, to everyone watching, I wanted to extend a couple of different shoutouts and backlinks because there's a lot of really good information beyond this video regarding Cyberpunk 2077 and a lot of other great titles that I feel could be properly utilized. So the Mad Queen is one of the primary sources for really in-depth lore and a lot of really interesting tidbits and expanded information regarding Cyberpunk 2077 and its upcoming release. So in the description down below, there is a link to her channel. I highly encourage anyone that's interested in this concept or might be interested in this game to check that out. Some really great stuff there. We also have a link to the Triple S League and their main channel. Again, that's the two representatives that I had here right now. I'm developing a working relationship with them, and it's been a true pleasure so far, and I really can't wait to expand more upon this in the future. They do a lot of really great content, some very in-depth stuff, and they're responsible for some very credible and very valuable information leaks and kind of deconstructive analysis of information that comes out in the gaming space. They have a lot of inside contacts and insider information, so I would, again, really recommend checking out their channel. And I'm also including a specific playlist on their channel, which includes all of their Cyberpunk 2077 material. If you want to just click that specialized link and then go find out more about this game. I know that I'll be watching a lot of those videos because this has really piqued my interest, and I can't wait to see more from CD Projekt Red and learn more about the title in general and when we might see a release date. But that's going to wrap it up, guys. Thank you for watching. As always, there are other links down below if you want to get integrated with Upper Echelon, and have a nice night.